Our next questions come from Sasha. Please go ahead, Sasha.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for having me. It's my first time here, and I'm a big fan. So my question is this. In recent months, I have been going through a stressful situation, let's say related to a lawsuit, and it's the direct result of my own action, sort of a bad decision. And hopefully it will be resolved soon in my favor and all that stuff. But in the meantime, it's been so incredibly stressful emotionally and financially because the other person is so high entropy and so focused on just whatever high entropy people are focused on, revenge, feeling complete again, thinking that, avenging himself, whatever, I don't know what goes on through his head. But anyway, the silver lining in this situation has been that I have been doing a lot of meditation and a lot of soul searching and a lot of facing my own anxieties and fears. And I've seen some interesting results, like the quality of my dreams is very different from it's ever been before. For example, I recently had a dream of being put in. I mean, it's not a dream that I would recognize as coming from my own unconscious mind. I was literally put in different situations that in real life would annoy me or upset me. Situations, along the lines of being cut off on the road or something like that. Someone literally bumping into you physically and not apologizing. Just very simple things like that in real life might annoy me, might get me to say, hey, excuse me, what are you thinking? That sort of situation. But in the dream, I was all serene, totally not bothered by it. Very, very different reaction from my reaction in real life. And it did sort of remind me of some things that you've said in previous videos. But anyway, my question regarding this situation is, how do I continue to grow and learn from this position that I've created for myself because of choices that I made? How do I continue to grow, and how do I minimize the level of stress that this high entropy person is causing? I mean, even one time in meditation, I wanted to connect with him, and I was overwhelmed by the sense of just dark anger, totally, I presume is his, just this incredible chaos, and I just haven't wanted to connect with him again at all. I don't even look at him when we're in court. It's just a very sort of, I mean, how do you protect yourself from a vortex of high entropy while also taking advantage of this high stress situation where I'm still able to, grow and learn more about myself and find a silver lining in that way.
Okay. Well, often we learn the most from things that are very difficult. When things are easy, we don't learn a whole lot from easy things. It's typically those things that cause us a lot of pain and cause us a lot of distress, which is where our biggest steps in learning take place. So when you have really big problems to deal with, usually you also have big opportunities to grow at the same time. So those two go together. So that's kind of a nice thought. There is that silver lining in the cloud, which is the big problems carry with them big opportunities. So how do you deal with negativity that's just being poured out at you? Well, you have the ability to turn that off as far as you're receiving it, you're feeling it. If another person sends you negative thoughts, you don't have to receive them. You don't have to accept them. You can just turn them off. But to turn them off, you have to be able to disassociate yourself from that situation. In other words, you can't be connected. If, let's say, you have a fear, you fear that person maybe will do something terrible to you. Well, that fear is a connection to that person. And if you have that connection, then that's a connection by which negative stuff can be sent to you. So if you are really annoyed at that person, if you really dislike that person tremendously, all those are connections that you have to that person. And then the negative energy sends can come to you over those connections. So if you can just let that person be, he is who he is, and you've seen some of his energy, and it's a horrible place to be in, and you're aware that he is probably one of the more miserable people, anywhere. He's probably in the top, 0.5% of miserable people. He's very unhappy. It's not just that he's unhappy with you. You just happen to be a way to vent his unhappiness. It really doesn't have much to do with you at all, except you were in the wrong place at the wrong time and got entangled. It's just the person is very, very negative, and that usually means there's a lot of self-loathing. There's a lot of dislike of self. And when you really dislike yourself, most people express that dislike of themselves by being harsh to others. If you dislike yourself, then you're not very nice to other people. And the reason for that is that you feel completely unworthy and not good. And if other people find you to be unworthy and not good, that's horrible. That's terrifying. So what you do is you act really, really nasty so that when other people find you horrible, you can blow it off and say, well, that's just because I'm nasty. It's not because inside I'm a failure. You see, that's the logic. When we talk, it's not really logic at all. It's kind of not logical, but that's the way people think. So if I can be just really annoying to everybody, then I look around and I say, well, these people are annoyed with me, but that's just because of my behavior. It's not really because I'm a failure deep down inside. It's just my behavior. So that helps a person deal with their own self-loathing if they act in a way that makes other people angry, because that then justifies the anger at the behavioral level rather than at the failure at the being level. So that's what's going on. So you run into a person like that who goes out of their way to be annoying and upsetting to people, particularly people he thinks that can't fight back or that are easy to intimidate, or that will curl up and put their tail between their legs and assume the victim role. If he thinks he's got somebody like that, well, then he'll be twice as unpleasant to those people, because there's not a lot of pushback from people like that. When they do push back, then he gets enraged because they're not playing the game right. They were supposed to be passive victims. Now they're pushing back. So then that's enraging. They're not doing it right. It's all their fault. You see? So you have to kind of see the mindset of somebody that's in that level of self-loathing and unhappiness. They're a very miserable person, and they are sharing their misery with you, unfortunately, in a way that you can't just escape easily because you're entangled in a legal issue. So you'll have to see that legal issue through. The way to deal with it is to detach yourself from that person, from that issue entirely. If you have no attachment to it, which is the fear, the being annoyed, the being upset, the being humiliated, if you've got all of that negative things going on, that's an attachment to that situation. Okay, so you detach yourself. Once you're detached, then that other person cannot touch you energetically. You do not receive it unless you open yourself to it on purpose. At that point, then he can rant and rave all he wants, and all you see is a disturbed person who is full of self-hatred and having a miserable day. And if anything, you have a little empathy for him and say, wow, being him must be horrible. And then that way, you not only have negative toward him, you have a little positive toward him. Poor guy. His whole life has probably been like this. His whole being is just consumed by negativity. And you don't want to, be like, what is it, Brer Rabbit in the Song of the South. He slaps the tar baby and then gets stuck because the tar baby is sticky. He gets stuck because it's sticky. So you don't want to reach out and slap something that then you're going to stick to it. Well, you can think of it that way. If you get angry, then you're sticking to it. You're reaching out and you're slapping back because you're upset and you're angry, and it sticks to you. That's the problem. Be totally apart from it, in which case it just won't bother you. Now, at the same time, you have to be aware of the possibilities. What this person will do. People who are like that can get very desperate in their need not to face the real problem, which is their dislike of themselves. So if you are a burr under his saddle, to what extent will he go to remove that? So if it's a possibility that you're physically in danger or something else, then be careful. You need to be very careful. You need to think about it. You may need to consult somebody that understands that sort of thing and can help you prepare for that. Whatever that means. It depends. This whole thing will be over. It's not like legal things go on forever. They do have an ending, even if it takes, some time to get there. So until that ending is done, and maybe for some time after, you need to be very cautious. Mm-hmm. But if you always deal with that person straightforwardly, like you say, when you're there, don't look at him. When you interact, just make, he's somebody you have to deal with legally. But other than that, you don't have to have any connection whatsoever. And that will make it much better on your side. If you think there's a threat, then you need to, talk to the people, that might help you deal with that. If you think there's an actual threat going on to yourself, and that's a possibility when you deal with people who are that mentally ill, you never know what they might do. But that needs not to be a fear. It just needs to be an intelligent concern. If that's a fear, then you put energy into that possibility happening. You see? So you need not to fear that. You just need to understand it so that you can be smart about what you do and what you don't do. So fear is never helpful, but being aware of the situation is. So I don't know, does that help you have?
That's extremely helpful. Thank you, Tom. There is no, I'm not worried about any physical threat at this point, but the anxiety that I have, which I guess anxiety is fear. The anxiety is mainly emotional distress and financial anxiety and just sort of my own, self-blame of how could I have trusted this person to begin with and opened such a door onto myself, basically.
Yeah, and that's the fear. That's that's negativity coming from you. How could I do that? You're looking at yourself and, you're finding some blame. I got into this situation. I should have known better. I saw the signs and I ignored them. You're going through all this stuff. Well, okay, learn from it. Yeah. You got a very important lesson here, but learn the lesson and then let it go. You can't keep beating yourself up or going down that path is just not helpful. Again, detach from the situation.
Yeah.
Detach from it where you're not wound up in it. You don't have anxiety in it. You've dealt with all of that and you say, okay, here it is. Now we're going to have to work the legal thing to the end, and then that'll be the end of it. I've learned some things. I've learned some things about me. I've learned some things about how gullible I might be. I learned that gullibility comes out of my own needs. I've learned this, I've learned that, and you come out of it a better person.
Yeah. And I feel it. I even feel my own anxiety. I know that it's actually a thread that he can yank. I feel it, I know it.
Yes.
And I need to sever that, and I've been working on that. Yeah.
Yes. So you need to let go of that anxiety and find what is the cause of that anxiety? Well, it'll be a fear, probably attached to ego of yours. How dare he do that to me? That's just your ego. How dare life be the way I don't want it? It's how dare people be that way to me? I don't deserve that. And that sort of thing. Well, that's just ego. You have to accept that life is like this for whatever reason, for whatever part you had in it. It's just, that's all water under the bridge. And now you just have to learn from it. And once you learn from it, it's not likely to happen again.
Yeah.
You see, so yeah, let it go. Accept it and then let it go. Don't stay connected to it, because that's the only way that his energy can pull on you. That's the only way. And you have the ability to cut that line, because that's your own ego and your own fear that establishes that connection.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's extremely helpful. And can I ask my second question? Do I have
Sure.
time? Okay. So my second question is, so I've run a home experiment, as an amateur scientist, of sprouting lentils in a dish with wet cotton, like we used to do. And and I would send intention to one dish and not the other. And I repeated the experiment a couple times, and the findings were interesting. In that the dish that I sent intention for, and each round ran for 3 weeks before I repeated it again. So the one that I sent intention for was very delayed in sprouting, and then when it sprouted, it came out in one straight line. And the second time I did it, it came out in 2 straight lines that crisscrossed in the middle. And I've been meaning to kind of keep repeating this experiment. I know it's a home experiment. I would love to find, other home experiments that have a shorter cycle time. But my question regarding that, basically a couple things. Do you have any reading into what this might mean? I know it's a home experiment, doesn't have a lot of controls and all that. But secondly, I find that in practicing my meditation and my intentions and all that stuff, I find it so much easier to focus intention, to do healing, to kind of do that, what I call, in my mind, the metaphor I use is sending energy, as opposed to receiving data, for example. So for example, I have a hard time remote viewing. Partly I find it boring and annoying, and I'm impatient. Partly I do it well 1 or 2 times, and then the ego interferes right away. But I would really like to kind of develop this, what I perceive as the other side of my intuition. I don't know if I'm misperceiving or what it is, but it just feels to me that one aspect of intuition, this sending energy out, is just easier, comes more easily to me. Even manifesting, healing is easier than diagnosing or receiving data for remote viewing and that sort of thing. But I don't know, and it feels strenuous. It feels like an effort, that sort of situation. When I know it needn't be, and sometimes it doesn't feel that way necessarily, but I do feel that send, So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they are different things. The sending and receiving require different skills. They're not exactly the same thing. They're both intuitive, but when you are receiving, it depends on how you're doing that. But if you're doing remote viewing, using a remote viewing target site to, where you get a number, try to remote view the picture that is associated with that number, and then you type the number in and up comes a picture. If you're remote viewing like that, where you are going to get the truth data very soon after you do it, there's a higher level of performance anxiety with that, because the truth data is soon to follow. and that's still in your mind. So kind of the, oh, am I going to get it right or not, is kind of a thought. Whereas when you're healing, it's not really about am I going to get it right or not, because it's long term. You know, what actually happens is going to be like with those seeds, you know, a week, 2 weeks later sometime. So the truth isn't quite so immediate, so it isn't quite so much in your mind. So that's one difference, is you get more performance anxiety when you receive, because you're going to get you're either going to get the answer right or wrong when you're receiving. When you're healing, well, it may manifest in 4 or 5 different ways, and any of them would all be okay. Or you're doing your plants, and your plants come in lines or crosses or you know, nice, neat little rows, however they do. It doesn't matter. It's all a success, however that works out. It's not as cut and dried as, say, the remote viewing. So there's less performance anxiety. There's less having to worry about the result. The result will kind of take care of itself. All you do is give it the intent and let the result take care of itself. That's you know, that's an easier thing to do. Now the other issue besides performance anxiety is that when you receive, okay, you have to be open to something and be able to then receive that something clearly. And often the intellect gets in the way there, much more than the intellect gets in the way when you're transmitting and you're trying to send something. Now you tell your intellect, sit down, be quiet. I'm getting at an intuitive level. I'm in the right state. I feel the state's right, so I'm just going to use my intent and send. Well, that works pretty well. But when you receive, you need to be in the receive state, and you need to be in it exactly when the message comes. Right. Whereas when you heal, you do your healing when you feel it's right. Mm-hmm. You get into meditation, you get into point consciousness, everything's humming along, you let go of stuff, now you're ready, then you heal. Well, when you receive, you have to receive whenever the message comes. You're not sending the message. So you're going to have to receive it now, ready or not, here it is. See, so that's a little harder thing to do. So you have to learn to just be open and let whatever's there come into your mind, and then you perceive it. Whereas the intellect wants to judge it. The intellect wants to get it right. That's a performance anxiety. And the intellect wants to assess it and see if it makes sense. Because that's what we do with all our data in the waking world. Stuff comes to us in our normal world, in the physical reality, and we have to make sense of it. And it's our making sense of it is what makes that data useful or not useful. Because, you know, we get information overload. All sorts of information comes to us. Particularly now we're in the information age. We get tons of information. And what we do is we look at it and immediately we judge it, we sort it, we decide what's important, what isn't. We deal with what's important and we ignore what isn't. That's our habit to work that way. So now we're going to remote view, and it's hard for us to break that habit. That intellect wants to do the job that it's used to doing. And as soon as information comes in, it wants to assess it, it wants to judge it, and decide whether that's the real information or just some noise. But you can't determine that. The intellect has no information to go on to judge it. So it just gets in the way. So it's a little harder when you're receiving to get your intellect to sit down and be quiet, because your intellect wants to do what it always does, which is vet the information that's coming to it, assess it. And in this case, the intellect is completely useless because it doesn't have any information about that information. It doesn't know the source. It doesn't know anything. So you're asking a blind person to give you a description, of your neighborhood. It's not useful. So you have to tell the intellect to sit down, be quiet, just let you get the information, whatever it is, and you'll figure out whether it's significant or not later on, but not now. Hard to do because you have a habit to break. So the sending and receiving are really two very different skill sets. And the receiving is the harder skill set because it requires more focus, more control over the intellect than does the sending. The sending's all your way, at your time, when you're ready. The receiving is none of those. So yeah, two different things. They just take practice. And if you're a person who is, where performance is important to you, then you'll do remote viewing. And if you don't get a lot of them right, you won't want to do it anymore because you don't like to play games that you can't win. So that's just a personality. And if you don't want to play games that you can't win, then you say, this is boring. I don't want to do this anymore. You know, it's a waste of time. That's because you don't want to fail. And there's no way for you to ensure that you're not going to fail. So again, no control. And it's going to take a lot more practice. So it's just not as much fun to you because doing it and getting it right, you know, thinking about those little seeds and having them all do something amazing, like all grow, you know, really nicely in a little line. Well, that's immediate feedback. It's positive. And if it was negative and you thought about those seeds and they didn't do anything different than the other ones, well, you would have said, well, maybe I didn't get good enough dirt in there. Maybe those seeds were damaged, and you'd do it again. But you wouldn't be defeated because you can make up all kinds of reasons why that might have happened. It didn't have anything to do with you not performing. Whereas if you're remote viewing a target and you get it wrong, well, you just got it wrong, period. There's nothing else that you can, you know, no other way you're going to look at it or slice it or dice it to come out where, well, it really wasn't your problem, you know, it was some other problem. You know, because the computer must associated my number with the wrong picture. Well, of course, that's not going to happen. It's a computer, and there's a one-to-one correspondence between those numbers and those pictures. So it's just going to be a little harder for you to do that, but you can do it, and it'd be important to do it just so that you can learn those other lessons. Again, the stuff that's harder has bigger lessons in it. The stuff that's easier has easier lessons in it that usually aren't as big because you're already partway down that path. You don't, you know, it's not as, you don't need to learn as much. So it's easy.
And remote viewing is the best way to practice that.
Well, that's one good way to practice it because it is, you know, it's almost immediate feedback, and it tells you exactly, you know, how good you were at the remote viewing. So in that sense, it's a really good thing to do, but it's not the only thing that you can do. In the healing side, if that suits you better, you can do the diagnosis, where you look at people that have illnesses and then you try to see what the illness is, what part of the body is affected by that illness, and how serious is it. So, and you can get some information out of the database. Well, here's you know, here's health on this axis going up, and then here's time on this axis going. I got my fingers going wrong, going that way. You know, X and Y axis. I'm trying to make the picture come out, but the camera doesn't really do that. I wave my hands around and you can't see either one of them, so that's not useful. Anyway, think of an axis with health on the Y axis and time on the X axis. So you can ask for that person's health, a curve of the amount of health during time. That'll give you a prognosis of whether or not how they doing in time. So 0 on the health axis is death, and 100% is extremely healthy, and you can just let it vary however it does. So there's lots of things you can do besides remote viewing about getting data from a database. But everything has its own style. Everything works in its own way. So just because you get good at one thing doesn't mean you'll be good at all those things that have to do with getting data from databases. You have to learn and get used to the characteristics of every individual thing. Yeah, it's not true that my intuition's pretty good now, so I should be able to do everything that has to do with intuition. That's like, well, you know, I know a little bit of mathematics now, so I should be able to do all the math there is in the world. No, it doesn't work like that. You still, every different piece of math you come up against, whether it's, you know, vector analysis or, you know, integral equations or differential equations or whatever, you have to start and learn that just because you know math and understand how math works doesn't let you do all kinds of math. It's the same way with the intuitive side. Just because you get good at one thing, you still have to work at understanding the process of each thing individually. So remote viewing is a good one because the remote viewing can be very handy, you know, to see things like you're backing out and you have a truck on one side of you and then you have some kind of SUV on the other side and you're driving a smaller car and you want to back out of a parking space, but you can't see anything that's coming because you've got a big car on either side of you. Well, remote viewing's handy because you can just remote view what's out behind your car and know whether it's safe or not. And then, of course, you always are skeptical, so you back out very, very slowly. So in case something is there, there's time for you to stop and time for them to miss you. But in any case, remote viewing can be a useful thing.
Okay, thank you. That's extremely helpful. Is that the same thing as like checking in if my car got a ticket? Because I can do that with very good accuracy. Sort of, I check in, but
exactly, it is. You see, and what you're doing there is you are getting data out of the database. And that's easy for you, but that's easy for you because you're getting it as a feeling, not as a visual.
Yeah, exactly.
You see, getting visual data is very precise data. When you look at a picture, that's a lot of precision. There's a lot of bandwidth taken up with that picture. You know, there's either a mountain in it or there's not. There's either cactus growing on the right side or there's not. It's all very, very specific. Whereas a feeling isn't nearly so specific. A feeling is, you know, is there something wrong? Is there a problem there with a ticket?
Yeah.
Well, the feeling can just be any kind of sort of negative, kind of a feeling, and you've got your answer. So it's a much lower bandwidth than pictures, and it's easier to work in a feeling space. Well, what you should do with your remote viewing is you can reduce that to a feeling space by, instead of just looking at the whole picture, doing it in pieces. In other words, you look at that number that corresponds to a picture and you say, well, what does it smell like? Is there an odor to it? And then wait. What are the dominant colors? And then you wait. You write them down. What, is it sad or happy? That kind of thing. What's the mood? Again, feeling stuff. Is it sad? Is it happy? Is the mood, like partyish and fun, or is the mood somber? Or is there no mood at all? It's just neutral. Maybe a landscape doesn't have any particular mood to it. Is it upbeat or downbeat? It's like a city of New York from the air with, people and cars going every which way. That would be a busy picture, as opposed to maybe a picture of a flower would not be busy. So you ask all these questions for all your senses. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What's it sound like? What are the sounds? Is it happy? Is it sad? And all the things you can think of. And every time you get something, write that down. And you'll be surprised. Now you've converted the picture into feeling space. And you're working more in the feeling space, which is an easier, lower bandwidth space to work in. And it's much easier to get that perception than it is to get, 300 DPI, photographic vision, of a picture. That's a lot harder to get. So do your remote viewing. That's what you're doing. You're kind of remote viewing in feeling space rather than remote viewing in vision.
Right.
Vision space.
I do that. Yeah. Thank you, Tom. That's extremely helpful. It's right on. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sasha. Also, Tom, I know from some of our remote viewing friends that those healing hits are substantial, genuine hits as far as the protocol of the remote healers goes. So you can acquire a lot of information from the feeling of
Sure.
Those things.
Yeah, don't reject feeling space just for visual space. Everything is in visual, and visual is actually harder to deal with because it's got a lot more bandwidth and there's a lot more specificity to it. You know, it's hard to get a general picture. It's easy to get a general feeling. You know, pictures tend to be highly specific, which gives the intellect a much better thing to try to grab hold of and sort for you. Whereas the feeling, it's a little more nebulous, and the intellect doesn't really do its work in feeling so much. So it kind of leaves you alone more in the feeling space.
Yeah.
And you can feel all kinds of things. I know people who say, I'm not visual. I just don't visualize things. But when I go get information, I just feel. And this last time I went out getting information, what I felt was that there was this red car parked along the curb next to this house that was brick, but not the red bricks, the kind of silvery whitish bricks. There was a green hedge all the way around, you know, and they describe a picture, a visual picture. They swear they don't get any visuals, but they feel things. And it's just another way of expressing the data, because if you told them, no, just tell me the picture. You're obviously getting all the data for the picture. Just tell me what the picture is. They can't do that. But they can tell you in feelings what that picture is in all sorts of detail.
Yeah.
You see, how do you feel a red car? You know, what does red feel like? You know, they're getting the information, but they're interpreting as feeling, because for them, that makes it easier for them to get it than if they try to interpret it as a picture, a visual, because they're convinced they don't get visuals. But they can feel the color red as opposed to the color blue. So we get information and then we process it. And we process it into sense data. Well, we also process it into feeling data. So it's amazing how much detail you can get into a feeling if you start working in feeling space.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much. And then
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but Tom, did you have any thoughts on why the lentils came out straight line? Is that like really lowering entropy?
Well, not really, but it was one of two things. One, the intent you had a picture, and maybe in your mind when you had an intention you were seeing little sprigs coming up. Often when we intend things, we kind of have visuals of what that looks like. And you may have seen this, you know, these crops coming up like that, and you didn't actually think of it as coming up in a straight line, but that's the way it was in your vision. In other words, you didn't see it from the air looking down where you would see them scattered around. You were looking at the edge, maybe of a field, something like that, or at the edge, at the dirt level edge, and all you could see were these stalks coming up. So it either was something like that in your intent there was some bias toward that sort of a picture, because you were imagining them or seeing them in a particular way. All these little stalks, one next to the other, and they're all hardy and they're green and they're happy and they're growing fast. But if you saw them in your mind as a bunch of little stalks side by side, then maybe that's what you got. So that's one thing. The other thing would be is that if the larger conscious system just thought it would be fun to make them all grow in a little line, look, you got a crop circle. Well, maybe a crop line or something else. If you get good enough, maybe they'll come in real intricate geometric patterns like the crop circles. So it could have just been the system just having a little fun with your experiment to give you a little more interest in trying to figure out what in the heck is going on here and why.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Tom.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to Cheryl's question. She can't be with us for the entire time, so we'll move on with that. And she's on listening mode, so I'll be reading the question for her. Cheryl asks, Tom, I have changed since I decided to put all my focus into getting rid of ego, fears, and beliefs. My friends and family all notice the improved version of the Cheryl show. They are now asking me a lot of questions. How did you do that, and why are you so different? I tell them that we can grow up by getting rid of fears, ego, ego and beliefs. Many times I'm getting the same thing, but I need my ego or I would not feel good about myself. Over and over, I tell them the same thing. Ego is in the service of fear and does not help us. It seems that there is so much confusion about the difference between ego and self-esteem. As I see it, ego covers up the fact that you don't feel good enough, and healthy self-esteem is the understanding that you are good enough, which brings a feeling of worthiness. Can you please expand on this concept and talk about the differences between the two?
First, the ego, yes, is awareness in the service of fear. Okay, that's just the way I define it in MBT. Okay, and there's also awareness in the service of love, and that awareness can have, it also has a self-image. So being self-aware is what awareness is. Awareness is aware of self. So that is not the definition of ego. Sometimes when people are not being very specific, they will say that ego is just self-awareness. But that's not really the case. There are two kinds of self-awareness that we have. So I guess maybe in general we could say ego was self-awareness, but it's not only self-awareness. There's self-awareness in the service of fear. There's self-awareness in the service of love. Okay. One of them is aware of self and aware of how self, the awareness in the service of love is aware of self. It's aware of how self interacts with others. It's aware of others. Okay. And in the ego, in awareness in the service of fear, it is aware of the fear. It is aware of the self and how the self relates to that fear, and it's aware of the fear in relation to the self to others. So there's a difference. One's fear-based, the other one's love-based. In Freudian speak, the ego is fear-based, the superego is love-based or caring-based. Now, that's just a very, very general statement there, but that would be the way to kind of map this to the Freudian model, would be to let the awareness in the service of love be the superego. So we have both of those. Now, awareness of self is necessary. You have to be aware that you exist. Otherwise, how would you interact with somebody else if you didn't even know you were there? I mean, that's silly. We need to be aware of ourselves. And we need to be aware of how we interact with other people. But if the way we interact with other people is through fear, which means through our buttons, things that set us off, things that we interact because of fear. Fear is the motivator. Then that's what I'm calling ego. Now, a good self-esteem is very positive. Bad self-esteem is very negative. Self-esteem basically is how much you like yourself or dislike yourself. Do you hold yourself in high esteem or in low esteem? If you have low self-esteem and don't like yourself, then you're very limited in what you have to give to anybody else. So that means, all of us have a capacity to love. Some of us who are full of ego have a much smaller capacity to love, or those of us who have fear have a much smaller capacity to love than those who don't. Okay, so if your self-esteem is low and you don't feel good about who you are, then you're going to be full of fear, full of ego, full of beliefs. And your life is going to be mostly unhappy, stressful, miserable, struggle. Whereas if your self-esteem is good and you really feel good about yourself, and when I say good about yourself, it doesn't mean that is, oh, I'm a wonderful person, I'm so great. How could anybody not like me because I am just nearly, perfect, and everybody should just, hand me money as I walk by because I am just so awesome. That's not what I mean, feeling good about yourself. That falls under the heading of narcissism, and that's not what I mean by good self-esteem. By good self-esteem means that you don't have a fear of being inadequate. You feel adequate, not super adequate, anything, just you feel okay with who you are. I am okay, and I have issues, maybe. I have fears, I have ego, but I can work on it. I can succeed. You see, if you feel good about yourself, there's always a way up, and you know the direction up from down. When you feel bad about yourself, you're not sure there's a way up. You think that, there is this ceiling that you can't get by because you're just not that worthy to go further than that. So when you have low self-esteem, you're very limited in the choices you can make. Most of your choices are defensive. Most of your choices are in laying out lists of what you can't do and why you can't do it, as opposed to doing the opposite thing. So, yes, ego is awareness in the service of fear. It's not a good thing, because fear is not a good thing. But most of us have fear, and we have ego, which is really a strategy for us dealing with that fear. Our ego is a strategy for pretending that the fear isn't there. That's what the ego does. That's how it serves the fear. It makes the fear seem not so frightening, invisible, not really there. It's the rug that you bury the fear under. That's the ego's job. Okay? So we don't want that. But we do have to feel positive about ourselves, not negative about ourselves. That's essential. That's like this, when we were talking to Satya about this person who is so negative. That's a person who feels very negative about himself. And that's probably an extreme case. That's how you are when you feel really, really negative about yourself. You tend to cover that up with a lot of arrogance. If you feel good about yourself, you don't need to be arrogant. There's no need for that. Arrogant is not really in your list of choices. You have no need to be that way. You only are going to be arrogant when you have fear. Fear that you're really down deep, not really much. You're kind of a small little bit of nothing. You cover that fear up with arrogance. So that arrogance is your ego. See, that's how those things kind of interrelate with each other. So we need to start by getting rid of the fear, because until we get rid of the fear, we're not going to get rid of the negative feelings about ourselves. They're generated by the fear that we have.
Okay, Tom, another portion of that question was also there are many people who are successful professional athletes, business people and artists who have huge egos. Did the ego somehow drive them to where they are, where they think that they are better than everyone else at what they do, which helped them to manifest their success? Or was it just talent that got them there?
Well, now you are defining two different kinds of success. Okay? There is success in a big picture, which is growing up, getting rid of your ego and beliefs, getting rid of your fears, and that defines success. And then there's success out in the physical world, which means generally control, power, force. We define that as success. That comes in the form of money usually. If you have lots of money, you have lots of control, lots of power, and lots of force. So those are two different sorts of success altogether. So when you say that a person who's a success out in the bigger world, that doesn't mean that they have high quality of consciousness, and that's why they got to be a great big success. In the outer world, where fear dominates in that outer world, then there are many places where being arrogant will help you succeed in a world full of fear. So when you live in a world full of fear, then sometimes your ego will help you go up a ladder. Perhaps because you have a fear that you're a little bit of nothing, then you get very, very competitive to trying to prove to yourself that you're actually okay. And the way you do that, the way your ego does that, is by trying to beat everybody else. And if you can't beat them fairly, you find ways to cheat. You go behind their backs, you make stuff up, you poison them in some way, not literally, but figuratively, by saying unpleasant things about them, whatever. So just because you can get to be successful in the control, power, force world by lying, cheating, and stealing doesn't mean that you're a success in the bigger picture. Matter of fact, it generally says you're a failure in the bigger picture. And even though you've got more money than you can spend, you are probably full of stress, full of anger, full of upset, full of negativity, and you are not happy. You are not satisfied, and you are struggling. You're an unhappy person. And you think that maybe if you just got more and more and more, you'd be happier. So maybe you just drive on. I'm a billionaire, but what I really want to do is make more money. Why is that? It'd be hard to find a way to spend that much money, even, the rest of your life. But a lot of people who get that much money, their biggest thing in life is to make more of it. Why is that? That's being driven. And it's being driven by something other than love. It's just something they have to do. They're trying to get to that place where they feel better. And you can't get it by amassing stuff. So that's the thing. We got different successes here. Yes, in a world full of fear, a world that runs on fear, a world that runs on push, rather than cooperate, runs on competition, then being dysfunctional maybe will help you succeed in that dysfunctional world. But only succeed in a way that is little picture success, not big picture success. And no matter how much you succeed in little picture success, you're going to be unhappy and miserable. Even if all the pictures taken of you look like you're happy because you've got this smile you've learned to paste on your face whenever a camera's around, people who really know you at a deep personal level will know that you're very, very unhappy person. So there's just two kinds of success, Cheryl. The one of them really isn't worth much. It's just control, power, force. The other one is invaluable. That's the one we're here to create. And for that, we need to get rid of the fear, get rid of the ego, and get rid of the beliefs.
Tom, Cheryl asks also about the nuts and bolts of getting rid of the ego. You said, make all your interactions about others. Even if you're acting at first, put yourself in their shoes, see it from their perspective. As I focused here, I noticed things in my head like, I wish others would think about my perspective sometimes. And my life has nothing to do with me. It seems that looking back at this was the last death throes of the ego, wanting to be at center stage, like it was fighting for its life. This went on for about 6 months. Then one day there was a shift. As I focused on others, the voice just stopped and became quiet. I noticed a serenity within myself that I never had. All of a sudden, I liked to focus on others. I wanted to strengthen my ability to care for others, and everything changed. Can you talk about this shift? Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, the way that works, and what Cheryl found out, is that as long as you approach life with the attitude of, well, what about me? How can I get something out of this? What's in it for me? What about me? I'm doing all the work. Somebody else needs, to help me. As long as it's focused on you, you're not going to find that people are very willing to help you. They will try to shift all the unpleasant work as much as they can towards you, because you're trying very hard to avoid it. You're trying very hard for somebody else to do this. So you'll find that the more it's about you, the less other people are really willing to give to you, because you're demanding it. You want it. On the other hand, when you actually make it about other, and you finally let go of that, yeah, I'm giving everything, but nobody's giving anything to me. Well, that's just your ego. When you get past that point and just give to people, what happens is that everybody then wants to give something to you. Everybody starts being nicer to you. Instead of everybody kind of holding their hand out like that, back off. Everybody wants to give you a hug, you see, because now you're being nice to them, and they feel that niceness, which makes them want to be nice to you. But when you're growling under your breath at them and saying, you're not doing it right, that's a cold prickly for them. You're not doing anything for me, and that's not good, because I deserve more. Well, then they feel like going the other way. They don't feel like giving you a hug, because you're giving them this cold prickly that you think they're doing it wrong, and they need to change, and they need to change now. You know, well, nobody likes to deal with that kind of a feeling, so they push back. So as long as you're at the center of your universe and want everybody else to be nice to you because you deserve it and you need it, and you're being nice to everybody and they're just not reciprocating, you're going to live in a prickly, cold world. That isn't going to be much fun. And then you'll probably go into more self-pity. Oh, woe is me. Look, I do everything for everybody else and nobody does anything for me. You know, and at that point, everybody's trying to avoid you because you're a downer. See, whereas when you were doing things for other people, now you're an upper. You're not a downer. Now people want to be around you because you're positive and you're pleasant and you do things for them. And, you know, because you do so much for them, they just feel like doing things for you too because you deserve it. You see, you can't, you know, you can't push people into being different than the way they are, but you can give them the space and the opportunity to grow themselves. So as you grow up, you help everybody around you grow up. And as they grow up, they start doing more for other people, not just themselves. So you got a room full of people and every one of them self-centered. Well, that's an unhappy family. But if you take just one person and have them start giving, then all the rest of them will start giving a little more too. And pretty soon you can change that whole family into a bunch of people who aren't so self-centered and they're giving to each other. But you have to do it by example. You can't lecture them and say, listen, I'm the only one giving around here. You guys need to straighten up. That will just, they see that as a cold, prickly condemnation of who and how they are. And they will just push back on that. That isn't going to help them grow up. So that's why I say the only thing you can do to help other people grow up is grow yourself up and then interact with those people. That will help them grow up much more than anything else you can do to them. You can hand them a book, you can give them a lecture, but that isn't going to do anything. Change yourself and then hang out with them and they'll start to change as well. So that's kind of the ethic of how that works. If you feel like you're doing all the work and everybody's taking advantage of you, well, it's because that's the ego. That's the self-centeredness that you have for that view. What you need to do is learn how to do that work with joy. Right? We talked about when T.D. asked the question, what is it about being present? You have to do the things you need to do without negativity. You need to do them by positively embracing them and giving yourself to it and doing it because it's a good thing to do. It's helpful for others. And if you have that helpful attitude and you are in the present moment without that negativity, then other people will say, oh, I could help you with some of that. Here, why don't I wash and you dry? Somebody will come over and want to help because there you are humming a little tune, washing all the dishes and drying them too. And somebody will just want to help you. Where if you're over there grinding your teeth, swearing under your breath, everybody leaves you alone. They walk away from you. You can do all the dishes yourself. Thank you. See, that's the difference. And that's why it works that way.